And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me making her return to these hallowed halls, the good sister and demon mommy of these holy grounds, Mistress Fiona.
Good morning, you adorable cuties.
So, this is a bit of a first for me in doing this sort of after-action report for a campaign that was offline. But to bring everyone up to speed, for the last 4 months, I have been GMing Riona for a duet campaign of the Miss Castle module for Sword World 2.0, using 2.5's rules to a certain extent, but Miss Castle came out very early in the 2.0 era of Sword World, and even before that, there were a few sessions of going through the videos that the Guarded by Cardia YouTube channel does regarding the history and lore when it comes to Sword World. Now, I'd say it went fairly well. It did result in a few adjustments on the fly, but that's nothing new for me. But I suppose the earliest spot to kind of go into is what prompted such an interest in Sword World, because I think up until this point you're more familiar with Lodos, which is and isn't associated with Sword World. And Sig, I had brought that up as well, and there's a lot more where that came from.
God bless this man for putting up with my nonsense and typos. Monk is an awesome DM as for what started my interest. Well, you got me into it by shwooing me the cardia videos.
Yeah, that certainly helped, and I've shown that channel to a lot of people, especially the history series, which I do know Aquid is planning on redoing those because he's gotten better info. Mostly through looking through interviews from magazines like Roll and Roll, as well as a few other things. I think I mentioned to you before, Roll and Roll
is awesome.
Is a magazine it's still getting a decent amount of publication. I describe it as the equivalent of Inquest Monthly, or I was going to say White Dwarf, but White Dwarf is exclusively a Games Workshop thing. Well, it is now. That used to not be the case back in the 80s and 90s. Same thing with the Dragon. It used to be more than just a D&D thing, but from how you had described things earlier when I asked about your own history with TTRPGs, it sounded like there was a lot of stop and start. A lot of campaigns that either started, got a few sessions in, but things fell apart. But not often a full-on story with a beginning, middle, and end.
I can struggle with finding people and more often struggle with time, yes.
And struggling with people and time is a very common thing. It happens to the best of us. Even me, and I'm not even the best. And I think based on what you had described to me, this is the first of this sort of open exploration kind of thing that you had experienced. What's often known as a hex crawl. Now, this doesn't have the same scale as the usual hex crawl, which are a lot bigger, but there is a similar sentiment.
Yes, it was a new experience and reminded me a lot of a VN.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that a couple times very early on, especially with how combat ended up working, which I will get into that, but to kind of set a bit of the stage, from your perspective, what would you say it is about Sword World as a game system, as a setting, and so on, that you found appealing enough to want to pursue this idea?
Well, it's our rich world with a great system for classes, and it rewards creativity and freedom.
I can definitely see that. And it is one that has a lot of history, and it's the reason why I started the bi-weekly podcast that I do on Sundays, which I didn't know that we would be getting an official translation for 2.5 when I started that. That just kind of fell right on my lap. And everybody's laughing, if I'm being honest. Everybody got surprised by that. But I think the next thing to go into with that is, you had brought up the visual novel comparison one time in particular, which was the first time you ended up going through a combat encounter utilizing the simplified combat system, since that's the style that was recommended for this module. So what prompted the visual novel comparison? Because it may surprise you, but I haven't done as many visual novels as I probably should.
Well, it was more what led to it, and looking through the book, which I had avoided doing to avoid spoilers, I can see it more.
Admittedly, from my end, one of the things that was tricky was having to juggle between the 2.0 rule set and the 1.0, because there are some key differences. I'd say one of the biggest ones is the fact that fellows are more of a 2.5 thing, and I did do that to kind of alleviate the fact that you're effectively running this in a duet. But I'd say one of the other things I am curious about had to do with the characterization you ended up going with the character of Crow, who, while it's not ready yet, I am working with an artist friend of mine to get a few pieces done for that. It's somebody who I've worked with for a few years now. And with that particular approach, you started as a grappler focused build. And as time went on, you ended up doing this mix of grappler and artificer. For those unaware, artificers are Magitech users and the only ones who can use firearms within Sword World. But what prompted that particular approach? Six sounds doomslayerish, and I love it.
Well, I suppose the background did, since from a very rural community and a very harsh wood, I went with a kid and focused huntswoman kind of focus.
Mhm. I can get that. I'm pretty sure if someone was less charitable, they'd say you're trying to channel me by going with what is the equivalent of a monk build. But I'm not that uncharitable. uh, so
I love martial artists.
And Grappler
I love O guns, and Artificer is so cool.
And it is. There's plenty of casting methods, but Artificer is probably the most representative of some of the things that separate Sword World from other fantasy settings. Namely, the fact that it is not strictly speaking high medieval. It is a post-apocalypse.
Yeah, kind like 3 to 4 end of the worlds in.
You had the first apocalypse after the gods decided to screw off because of all the fighting from humanoids and barbarous on that front. You had the second apocalypse when mages started messing around with demons. And then of course you had the re-invasion of Barbarous with the Diabolic Triumph. So yeah, that's multiple ages and multiple apocalypses.
Reminds me at time of Grandia at times, which is instant +2 to me loving something.
It's not the first time Grandia has been referenced in this monastery. There was a different project that tried to emulate Grandia's initiative point system that I covered a few years ago. So, precedent. But when it comes to the combat system we went with, which was the simplified version, obviously it doesn't care much about ranges. It only cares about front row and back row. What was your impression of that? Since from what you had told me, a lot of the games you had been involved with in the past were either full theater of the mind or were doing the standard grid combat a la wargaming approach. More the former than the latter.
I really love the approach we did. When I go and blend into a system, I often prefer focus on accuracy, with turned out to really help.
Yeah, there is that, and if I do this again, I may consider using standard combat, though not advanced. I feel like advanced in a solo setup doesn't quite work.
But also the speed was really interesting and fun.
Yeah, that is something I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to this type of approach. And I'm not to get lost in the forest of all knowledge for a moment, but I call back to my experiences with the fact that I've put my foot down regarding doing a similar 2-row approach for Legend Edition. And a lot of people have said, I can't imagine just not moving. And to that I've said, why not? But you but the of course the other thing that's funny on that is all three of those combat systems you see in Sword World, none of them are the grid combat approach. Yes, I see that Sig has made the has made the Civi reference with, you heard us shoot about it until it dies. How about shoot it until the gods fuck off?
Ye the rose we very a to understand and picture in T-Mind plus combat felt very snappy.
I think what helps that snappiness is the fact that you're only dealing with 2d6. That's with very rare exception, that is the only thing you roll. Whether it be accuracy, whether it be damage, it's all 2d6. And that snappiness is certainly essential, given that as someone who did a build that's more akin to a martial artist, that involves combos. In fact, right out of the gate, grapplers get chain attack. So it is kind of funny that you end up starting as a striker and ended up becoming a wrestler build as things developed. And also, Sig, if my mic cuts out again...
Yeah, I loved that. Also, combat reminds me a lot of Fire Emblem at times.
I could see that, minus the weapon triangle, obviously, and the fact you don't lose characters permanently if they get to 0 HP. I will admit that there were certain things in Mist Castle that I kind of skimmed. One of them being the time band thing, if only because I was operating under a particular time frame as far as each session, giving myself a time limit of 4 hours. That meant that the random encounter stuff, as well as the way the average day the day cycle was supposed to work, were things that I knew would bog things down. They certainly work if I had a longer time frame, but when I'm working with 4 hours, I have to adapt. Nothing new for me, but you work with what you have, and I've always tried to maximize what I have.
You did great.
Now, I do recall when we were setting this up early on, I gave you a choice of which of the existing modules to go with, and I think Mist Castle was your pick more than it was mine. Do you remember why you picked Mist Castle over the others, like World Odyssey and some of the others?
It caught my eye. The art and vibe really sparked with me. Vice City did too, but I don't think it's translated yet.
Vice City has been translated. Uh,
Oh, nice. Sorry.
Vice City has been translated, but it is still very. That Vice City was very early in 2.0. Actually, not 2.0. Vice City was 2.5, and was mainly the. And while it certainly works, it's not gonna. It doesn't have the same amount of scale. But Mist Castle has quite a bit, and it does have a reputation as the darkest of the Sword World modules. At least the ones released so far. And it did mean that some aspects of Sword World, like Sword Shards and Adventurers Guild, weren't able to quite be emphasized as much as they would have been in other things, like some of the scenarios in Start Guide Gonzale. But I also recall before we even started with session 0, us going through and rewatching, or well, rewatching for me. I'm not sure if you had seen it before on your end, the film Brotherhood of the Wolf.
MHM loved it.
It is a very interesting beast, and I picked that one because I felt going with Castlevania or Van Helsing would have been way too obvious. But I like doing those. I like doing some sort of film or show to help establish a tone. I think you were there when I did that with Macross Plus in preparation for the SMG Robotech campaign.
It does help a lot with getting mental image stuff on his same track.
This is the reason a lot of games have an Appendix N, and why I bring it up a lot with people that I do interviews with on their games. Appendix N is a shorthand for this list of inspirational media. It can be video games, it can be other TTRPGs, it can be war games, it can be film, comic books, novels, anything under the sun that serves as a thematic reference. Pretty much every White Wolf book I have in my library has it in the first dozen pages. Even if they don't call it Appendix N, that's just the shorthand term for it.
Oh, that reminds me, if I recall right, barbers are also handled different in Mist Castle than in 2.5.
It depends on it depends on context. The idea of playable Barbarous didn't happen yet when Mist Castle came out. Mist Castle was one of the first few full campaign modules for Sword World 2.0. And eventually you would get books like Barbarous Tales that did allow for playable Barbarous. But the main difference between Barbarous in 2.0 and 2.5, playable-wise, is they didn't have their own dedicated class. In 2.5, when Barbarous Rage came out, the introduction of the Heritor class came to be, which allowed for a more expanded use of several Barbarous types in terms of what they can do. For example, with Basilisks, developing the Heritor class lets you get potentially more evil eyes. Not that you grow more evil eyes, but that you can do more stuff with your eyes as a Basilisk. and it also allows them to develop more powerful stats with the alternate form with a lot of barbarous. That's kind of the main difference.
Yeah, and Mist Castle is pretty much built around the player being on the bottom of the ladder in the caste system, and non-barbarous are that.
The only barbarous who would be at the bottom of the ladder are the Yoma type ones, which are things like goblins.
They are pretty stretchy.
It is amusing that goblins and the like are referred to as Yoma, because you don't hear the term Yoma being used all that often since the 90s. I think the term just fell out of favor. And hello there, Caleb. Welcome to the party. But I think one of the, if I recall correctly, you ended up doing levels in Artificer right around the time that Crow had found a old Magitech civilization rune. And in fact, a large amount of Mist Castle is built on the ruins of a Magitech city. Do you remember what prompted you in that moment to...
I try to play a character who in an arc and choosing levels and things based on what their experiences are.
Which is fair, and the way leveling works in something like Sword World certainly lends itself to it. I did mess around with it a bit because I personally prefer more milestone type leveling in a lot of my games. Like, you'll rarely see me use XP spend, whether in pretty much any game that I run, which is why I did the whole level setup that I did of X amount of major and minor.
Yeah, it's a good system.
It did result in possibly being a bit over leveled, but that I will also put as more of a me problem, since one of the other things I like to do is have someone go from starting level to max level by the end of a campaign, or as close to max level as I can get it. And Mist Castle, I think the level range that it wants to go with, it caps out at 10-ish. But because of how levels work in Sword World, that kind of thing is a little bit trickier to, I won't say balance, but figure out how to keep a decent challenge. Which I could have, which did kind of happen, because in the last few sessions you were just steamrolling through just about everything it had for you.
I'm a bit strange with how I make characters. I tend to go with what I personally like or what I think would make for a good story, even if it makes in the game system I may be at a disadvantage or not min-maxing. Like, I love the idea of Nightmares or Abyssborn and going with one knowing I'd be weaker to magic. And yeah, I got a little bit wuxia at the end.
Which, as wuxia as that could get, I will remind everyone, including myself, that at the tail end of the 2.0 era, there was an expansion called Fortuna Code, which allowed for transcendent characters and upped the level cap to 17. Transcendent characters are borderline gods, and in fact, there's the implication that some of them become gods through the fourth sword Fortuna. So you could have gone from Wuxia all the way to Tianxia.
I can see it. Even 10 to 15 my grappler was a demon.
And with levels 16 and 17, you start to get transcendent abilities. One of the sample characters in it is referred to as a sword hero, with a heavy implication that he is wielding a sword of Genesis, or at least a big chunk of one.
Ha ha, nice.
And given what the swords of Genesis can do, that speaks volumes. But there are also concepts like Astrade, which are effectively automata that were made by the gods. But unfortunately, since
So stronger than the Dooms?
Yes. The problem is no one knows how to control them, and Astrade were meant to fight other divine creations during the War of the Gods. So most people want to stay the hell away from them because Astrade are sentient and don't quite know what to do now that the gods aren't present in the world.
They can always hunt goblins, filthy creatures. I stay far away from them.
Although, since you brought up the Doom series of Magitech, I suppose I'll bring that up. Obviously, that whole thing of there being effectively a mech hangar full of Dooms was not fully in the module itself. That was something that I improvised on the fly. And
I squeed hard.
And a big reason I did that improvisation was, for one, it could actually fit. There was already a backdoor for it, and two, I felt it was a natural progression given the layers of protection and the layers of security within that particular area. It wasn't necessarily a dungeon crawl because it was only a few rooms, and I didn't feel like doing a full dungeon crawl kind of maze because it wasn't going to be that kind of game.
Makes sense. It felt fitting and had no idea it wasn't part of it since it made so much sense.
Mm-hmm. But I would say one of the things that is in it that I didn't get into because the situation didn't call for it was there's a bit of a rule in Risk Castle that if you end up getting KO'd, if you end up getting party wiped, you may get picked up by Demon Tamer Zalbar, that black rabbit that got killed by Arya. And experimented on. In the best case scenario, the experimentation might just give you some weird looking eyes. Worst case scenario, he might have added things to you. Essentially turn you into a chimera.
Yeah, honestly, having some monster parts would be cool. Nothing would be safe if I had tentacles.
Tentacles isn't even the worst of it. But the like there were different random body parts that could have been integrated based on a dice roll. Because Miss Castle is trying to do this theme of enemy lines and the depths that Barbarous will go. But for example, you could have gotten stuck with toad feet, or the legs of an androscorpion, or have your entire body be made into that of a troll, or that of a giant balloon seed flower being stuck in your chest, or a faceless as your head.
Oh, no balloons in my chest. Whatever would I do?
Or things like good old Medusa hair, and all of these are mostly irreversible. The only way to because they're not a magical effect, the only way to change it back would be things like the reincarnation or call god spells.
I dig that kind of awesome permanent horror.
Mm-hmm. That is very much a strong theme throughout it. Another thing that was, when it came to the list of upper Barbarous that were taken out, a lot of them were taken out through non-combat methods. Part of the reason I leaned into that was in part because of time, and also due to some instances where doing a full combat encounter didn't feel appropriate.
Setting up plans for taking the shot was also fun.
Mm-hmm. Being a proper GM requires a degree of flexibility, and sometimes that means taking the plans that you may have set up weeks or months in advance and throwing them out to wing it.
Sorry.
Oh, I always have backup plans for my plans, so it's not as much of a problem for me. But I've met some GMs who are very insistent on sticking to the plan. This is referred to in the trade as railroading, and is generally not advised. I think what helps is that I've spent time in improv theater, where you've got maybe a few bullet points and that's it. So if something happens that's completely unexpected, you just got to roll with it.
Trust the plan. Arthur, your character having to go the rest of Camine without shoes is very important to the plot. Heavy breath eye noises.
But one of the other things that I did bend the rules a bit on was regarding combat schools. Combat schools was something that showed up later in 2.0, but a lot of people didn't notice it because it wasn't in any of the rule expansion centric books like Cardia Grace or Lumiere Legacy. Instead, it was in the guidebooks, specifically the ones on different regions, like the Explorer's Guide to Zaltz and the like, since each of those schools were tied to specific regions. And I wanted to bring in at least one of them to showcase the fact that you're not just limited to things like your class and combat feats and spells in terms of customizing your character. But what was your take on the idea of combat schools and advancing in them?
Honestly felt pretty rewarding. Getting and learning from scrolls was very interesting and made a lot of sense in the world and the way the game plays.
That, and it addresses a pet peeve that I've had, which is this idea of, say, the monk, the martial artist archetype being a one-size-fits-all combatant.
Plus it helps since Sword World really rewards you covering weaknesses and being a competent generalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't be a jack of every trade in Sword World. Well, you could, but you're going to be spending way more XP than you'd need to. But you can do a wide variety of things with a mixture of major and minor classes, since effectively your classes are skill packages, and in fact, in 1.0 they are referred to as such. But consider the different types of fighting styles you see.
By the end I could fight with fists and throws and use out of combat or encumber spells and had ranged weapons to fall back on, so my strategy never felt limb-tied.
Very much so. The other thing to notice is when it came to the build you had eventually developed. I remember you referencing Hay from Darker Than Black, which is an interesting choice.
Chinese Electric Batman.
Yeah. Oh, we have all agreed we will not speak of Gemini the Meteor.
But Artificer does indeed get a very extensive and also toolkit.
Yeah, and a lot of the a lot of the casting classes within Sword World have a very heavy amount of versatility. Artificer has probably the most in terms of versatility in and out of combat, to make up for the fact it doesn't have the kind of raw power that Fairy Tamer or Sorcerer are going to have. So the way I've described it is Sorcerer is the closest thing to a Blaster caster. Shaman is a little bit support leaning, especially with the fact that Shamans can use golems. Warlock is complicated. And Fairy Tamer is akin to an Elementalist Summoner. But because of the fact you're getting 3 to 4 spells every level, you're going to be doing a lot of varied things with those spells.
If we played Mist Castle or a different one again with a more heavy focus on stealth and subterfuge, I can see Artificer being even more fun.
Mm-hmm. I may consider that when if at any point in the future Myth Grave gets translated, which is effectively a sequel to Mist Castle. Though, if I were to do that, I would have to take into account how the story of Mist Castle ended for this campaign, which is it is most certainly not a barbarous controlled city anymore. Due to the Light of Shalicious, any high level barbarous is not going to be going in there.
And all the giant robots attacking.
Yeah, there's that too. And when it comes to Magitech within Sword World, there is a large theme of the technology is still there and still largely intact, but it is dormant. And you see a fair amount of that within the Magitech ruins that we saw, where if you knew the password or you knew how to use it, the tech can still be used. Some of it got destroyed due to the Diabolic Triumph, but not all of it. I think a case in point.
I compare it to knowing Excel or not in an office setting.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the big case in points was the Sluice Gate, and the fact that it was a set of 3-digit numbers. It was a secret Sudoku puzzle, and had it where the codes were known by people, but nobody had the full picture of what it actually could do. Just the numbers that had been passed down and some legends.
Yeah, that was cool. Loved how it all built up over time.
What my dear friend would call long-term booking. But I do see in the chat Caleb asking if there was a dragon class in Sword World. Not necessarily, but there was Dragon Knight as a title in the Dragon Raid event. That is a whole other kettle of fish. since there is a part of Sword World setting where you have a symbiotic relationship between humans and dragons, but that wasn't the setting that was chosen for Mist Castle.
And Basilisk character can be a little dragony.
Yeah. I would describe the Basilisk's transformed state as that of a wingless dragon. I think something else to note that was certainly an interesting choice to go into is what was done with the fellows. Now, fellows was a concept that was introduced in 2.5 with the idea of allowing a player character to still participate even if they weren't there at the time. And this was something that I ended up delving into, and it was a bit tricky for me because playing 4 NPCs at once when I'm only just one person would inevitably result in me having conversations with myself, and I wanted to avoid that. But some certainly got more attention than others. One of them in particular kind of became the...
Yeah, you focus a bit on carvers and honestly made for a great story.
I was limited because of how the companions work. But Kavas as a nightmare who chose the path of a priest was an interesting approach. Plus, one of the other classes that Kavas had was Tactician. Tactician fills an archetype that I've always enjoyed, which is the frontline commander. The person for whom the party is their weapon, rather than, well, their weapon. Of course, you had to go with the tease nuts joke against Draken.
And the way followers kind of stayed out of fights I was already kind of strong in was a nice touch. It felt very fighting anime with them on the sidelines. I imagine doing explosion at each other, mostly Rumase and how she knows this beast have been fighting for 3 rounds.
Oh. When it comes to, I think the only because there's not really a set rule on it, a set amount of rules when it comes to advancing fellows on their own. It did mean I had to get a little creative with their setup as well as the math for them. I
liked how you handled it a lot.
And some stuff was improvised, like say Rumi having a thing of being deathly terrified of dragons, and people treating it with a no shit, you're afraid of dragons, they're fucking dragons.
Lolly.
It was. And Caleb said, but an anime-ass tabletop game, I wish we had that here in the West. We have a lot of that. And, oh, speak of the devil, hey there. We have guided by Cardia in the chat. But
Poor Rumi, the mechanics kind of made her out to be kind of a space cadet.
the approach I was trying to go with Rumi was that she was simple. She was the most straightforward, just there for a good fight. I'd say if there was anyone who was the biggest space cadet, it was Lyriel, but you have the whole thing of dealing with fairies all the time.
True lol.
But when it came to the idea of check packages, what was your take on that concept? Instead of rolling for specific skills.
Honestly, very effective and streamlined.
I know that streamlining has
Avoids a lot of headache with it feeling empty.
Yeah, I know that streamlining has become something of a dirty word because of its overuse in the 7th generation of game consoles. But I've taken the approach when it comes to skill systems that it's best to have a smaller but more widely used set of skills than a large skill list where a good chunk of them are barely going to get used or are so situational as to not be worth the investment. I'd say stuff like Shadowrun is my whipping boy when it comes to this concept.
True lol.
What certainly doesn't exactly help that matter is when certain skills are ones that are over specific. What immediately comes to mind is the use rope skill in D&D 3.0, 3.5, and in Pathfinder, where the obvious question of how often are you going to be using rope in the course of one session comes to mind.
-3 penalty if you don't buy them dinner or call him daddy first.
But in addition to that, the whole thing of him wearing that mask that was akin to the mask that King Baldwin or that was something I did completely on the fly in that moment. I didn't plan that out at all. But as the campaign was going, I saw an opportunity to do something, so I did it.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it, plus it's a mask where you can see the eyes well.
When it comes to I think if there's any disadvantage that I had or anything I'd probably do differently, it's the fact that due to when this came out, the casting options for monsters was somewhat limited. Most of them were using either sorcery or shamanism, which both of those are nice, but I think there were a few times where I felt like maybe this character should be using demon magic or using spirit magic, but I wanted to stick as close to the bestiary as presented as I could. It did result in me having to jump back and forth
Feels
between...
conceptually limited with only 2 options.
It certainly could be, and again, and this is why context is king. Because you know, this was very early on in Sword World's timeline, and it's not like those spellcasting types are extremely limited or something. It's just with certain characters, I felt it didn't quite fit. But at the end of the day, it's something that I just improvised my way through. But if you were to revisit the world of Sword World with a different character and a different build, for say Fairy Garden or World Odyssey, or even something like Demon's Line, what build do you suppose you'd go with instead of going with a grappler? As far as what class you'd probably want to explore in a future attempt. And Cardia just corrected me. Only fairy tamers were absent in early 2.0. Androscorpions used Artificer still, and sorcerers, conjurers, and priests were there for Barbarous. So, I stand corrected on that front. I think I got things up
I love martial artists, but diving more into magic does feel very appealing, especially in what I understand of Fairy Garden.
It sounds like if you were to revisit, you'd probably lean into Fairy Tamer. Would that be accurate?
Yes, with maybe just a few options to cast Fist.
Which I could see, and there are ways to lean more into the punching and kicking part than the throwing part, which is what you leaned it into. And of course, there are options for doing a middle ground of sorts with classes like Battle Dancer. I think at one point I called Battle Dancer the bastard child of some of the other warrior classes. And admittedly, of the ones that are available, the one that'd be high up on the list of potential ones to explore is World Odyssey, because of the crazy directions that one goes into.
Battle Dancer the Bastard Child was my stripper name.
But I think it wasn't too much of a surprise that you integrated enhancer, since enhancers tend to go along with grapplers quite often. Although a lot of times when people do enhancer builds, they usually stock up on stones so that they don't have to rely on their own mana reserves as much. Obviously, given the setup that you had there, trying to stock up was not an easy thing to do. But
I did enjoy Enhancer, but the way I used it mostly is a pre-fight buff option.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, but hold on one moment. I need to hit the BRB for a second. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. And seriously, you call that cursed? Bunch of fucking amateurs, I swear.
Lol.
And Dragon said earlier, so you don't want a skill for every single weapon? No! I did my time with that shit in 2002. Seriously, whenever somebody tells me that a given game is too complicated, I'm like, you have no idea how good you've got it. But I do think one of the things that's a bit tricky when it comes to working within Roll20, that is a common thing, especially with high level monsters in Sword World, was targeting parts.
I have played RIFTs, and character creation alone is an entire session.
Mm-hmm. Something like GURPS can be 3 sessions. Sometimes more, because look, there's a reason GURPS is my whipping boy. Mostly for GURPS stands, but that's another matter entirely. But like with some of the high level monsters, you have the fact that you can target both body, wings, or other extra parts. That kind of thing is somewhat tricky to do in Roll20, especially with ones that have multiple body parts. And each one of those has their own HP and MP reserve. That's what's referred to as fighting style with individual ones. Which, in a roundabout way, would make Sword World a very easy transition to do a Dark Souls-like campaign. Arguably, we did that with Mist Castle, but the option is certainly there.
True.
And the other reason I say the option is there is because this is not something that you got to fully experience because you were mostly doing a grappler build, but the choice of handedness on certain weapons can play a factor. And there's several weapons that have a one-hand and two-hand option. And the big difference between those one-hand and two-hand options, a lot of times, is a different power rating.
Well, you see, Shift's sword, I was actually left-handed the entire time.
There's a missed opportunity there for a Princess Bride joke, and shame on you for not getting that one. I'm not left-handed. But something else I do remember you commenting on is how the city of the city of Mist itself gradually developed in a way that seemed natural, even if it was completely done through dice rolls. Granted, I had to improvise.
Yeah, like the ruins of temples and functions. Temples ended up nicely placed with various lived-in buildings.
Mm-hmm. And since I was asking you to roll 2d6 each time, though I did have to improvise a bit because we ended up getting the same results down the road, which I knew was going to happen as there were less and less spots to put things in. But it is somewhat amusing that ended up happening. Admittedly, getting the text on the map was a bit tricky, because when I tried to do just manually typing it in, I didn't like the way it was set up, which is why I went with the whole images approach that I did. Just taking those images straight from the PDF itself.
It was nice and did a good job giving a mental I am GEOF the world.
Mm-hmm. But if the designer's notes are an indication, they were trying to lean a bit into the style of game book, which does make me wonder if they had a copy of Death Trap Dungeon or some of its follow-ups, or one of the many books in the Fighting Fantasy series.
Lol, I can see it.
Some of those game books were not the most forgiving, and given what's coming next year, I do hope to revisit that in the future, especially with the Lone Wolf universe. But
the way the map works also reminded me of VNs.
And I can see it to a point. Obviously with visual novels, there's gonna be a different approach. But the big thing that I ended up falling to was hex crawls. Now, hex crawls are an old stalwart in the world of TTRPGs, but the idea is a collection of areas on a map, hexes, that the players are exploring through and going through different events, encounters, and the like. It doesn't have necessarily a full story because it's meant to be a sandbox. Now, Mist Castle isn't exactly a sandbox, but there are elements of that within it. And Guided by Cardia says, Miss Castle was originally an arena supplement, probably the one we are getting in a month. But with story, it spiraled into what it had become. Which, that makes sense given the extensive amount of encounters in the arena part of Mist Castle. And since the idea of arenas and boss monsters would be revisited in Battle Mastery, I guess the idea never fully left the development team.
It reminded me a bit of Legend of Mana too.
I can certainly see that, and it's funny you bring up Legend of Mana because I've used that game in particular as a reference point for the kind of things that I want to see when it comes to weapon design in RPGs. I absolutely loathe the idea of every martial character just being the basic attack sword and board kind of character. The basic fighter.
Oh god, yeah, I
character.
love that system.
Now, even before I got the full game, I was playing through the demo a bunch of times just trying out different weapons. Even if one might argue that me going with a staff wasn't as optimized as other ones, I'm going with a staff because, one, I was maintaining the monk gimmick even as a kid, and two, I will relish any and every opportunity to use a staff weapon in a way that isn't designed for mages. The staff doesn't have to be the magic walking stick. And Legend of Mana will, if you end up revisiting this and going with a fairy tamer, Legend of Mana is an apt comparison to bring up because of the way elemental fairies work.
True.
And well, some of the named ones are going to be similar due to the whole summoning fairy part of it. But also the different elements that are involved. And Dragon asks, can it be the magic bonking stick? Yeah, just apply fairy weapon to it. Done. Like, certain character design approaches that might be daunting or require a degree of system mastery in other games are fairly easy to do. At least within Sword World. The big one, of course, being Gishes. That idea of somebody who is decently proficient in both fighting and casting. In plenty of games, that is very difficult to pull off. Or it ends up being balancing a tightrope. In something like this, it's stupid easy.
I love when elements are more than a grid of weak versus strong and each has its own unique quirks and personality. Mm-hmm. Like how you did crafting in Legend, and yeah, it feels very free.
Mm-hmm. The reason I did crafting in Legend in that manner was, one, a callback to Brother Tanner and his work. I blatantly admitted to him that I ripped him off. And two, I hate crafting systems in most games that I run. Because of that whole insistence on follow the recipe exactly, and I think about cooking and how many times somebody has deviated from the set recipe to do their own thing. And hello there, Chop. But if you were to revisit, would you go with Abyssborn again, or would you go with a different race?
Nightmare was another race I thought was very cool, and if I go Mro magic focused, look very fun for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's any archetype that lends itself naturally to the magic knight kind of approach, it is Nightmare, due to how Nightmare form works. Since the big thing with Nightmare form, aside from the combat bonuses it gives, is the fact that you can cast True Speech without needing a catalyst. With a lot of the magic types you see, you need to have some sort of catalyst, and I consider the gun to be the catalyst for Artificer. But some sort of item you need to be holding or have equipped in order to use magic, whether it be a magic implement, a staff of the sacred tree, or all the stuff that warlocks have.
True, which I like the concept of a lot.
Mm-hmm. It does mean that there is a significant disadvantage to going with that magic build, because that hand that you're using for that, unless you're willing to spend the extra gamble to get creative with it, it means that a shield or two-handed weapons would be off the table to an extent. But
risk, consequences, and reward often make things a lot more fun.
Mm-hmm. But I do think that there are some elements within 2.0 that if the chance came, I would try and emphasize more. One of them being flexible weapons, which is very much there for those who want to do a whip build. And in fact, there was a short we covered that went into how one could use that for doing a Belmont build. But there was a kind of spell customization setup that was exclusive to Artificers in the 2.0 era that I didn't fully delve into at the time, just because I didn't want to overwhelm, which is the same reason I didn't allow for the Warlock class. Warlock's not a bad class, it's just one that has a higher floor.
Yeah, I do wonder who viable a key guy kind of build would be.
That is certainly something to explore. And I have seen a few people attempt to homebrew gunblades to give more melee options for Artificers.
The Necromancer demon lady who used a whip in Thunderbolt Fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, the one who gave me the line of, if you got everybody who Gale screwed over, you could have a parade.
Ye lol.
Because I love and hate Gale at the same time. He is certainly upfront about what he is, but he's also a complete asshole.
My favorite hobby is just fucking with the most dangerous people I can find and then not doing anything about you them.
The only reason I can't be too mad is because I know I would probably pull that same kind of thing. Mostly because I have. But I do think that if I do think a bullet was dodged, because there are some classes that I think don't quite work as well as maybe they could in other combat setups. One of them being Rider. That's not to say Rider can't work in simplified combat. I just think it works better in standard or advanced, because positioning is very much important to it.
I did like the look of the giant spider mounts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember at one point you wanting to purchase one of these spiders, but you didn't have the gamble to afford it.
Ye lol.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I will admit that I was envisioning you using the monobike to get from place to place once you got that spell. So did it help to envision the Magitech sphere is akin to the mags from Phantasy Star? Because I do remember I made that analogy when we were setting up.
Yes, it helped a lot, especially Sickney so versatile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
also the car made me think of a tenor.
I could certainly see that. Now, with that said, obviously it would take a few weeks, but I think I had brought up to you in the future about exploring a project by our good friend Alex T. of Black Oath for a future entry, simply because if I were to immediately set up a new thing in Sword World with you, it wouldn't be with Crow. It would be with a brand new character and a brand new setup, and that would take time.
Always down for fun with friends, and makes sense we got a bit strong.
Mm-hmm. That, and I'd want to use that as an opportunity to explore other avenues.
Makes sense.
But something I had brought up earlier would be to explore Alex T's project Care Nethelas Into the Midnight Throne, which is a dungeon survival affair that is very much channeling old school Kingsfield, as well as game books like Death Trap Dungeon.
Looked very cool, and I adore Kingsfield.
Mm-hmm. You probably played one of its successors in Luna Sid.
Yep, also that classic dive is a big vibe for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it very much is. And hold on a moment. Restream is being a bit of a dingus at the moment. I use Restream's chat so that I can track chats across different sources. it was just being a little bit uncooperative for a second, but it's taken care of now. But I'd like to think that in the aftermath of all this, that there's been a bit of a new perspective on the wider world of tabletop, which some of it I think you probably got just from hearing me yammer on about whatever project I was researching at the moment over the last couple of years.
Yes, I love your work because you always bring eyes on awesome projects and we share alvo of expanding our horizons.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I hope that's something I hope to continue. But before I do one final wrap up, I suppose I should put myself in the crosshairs for a moment. Given that you've worked with a handful of GMs and had different experiences, what was your take on my GMing style?
You are very thoughtful and considerate. You put in a ton of work to make everything run smooth and kept it fun. I loved how you handled everything and made everything a truly experience for me.
Oh, no, their odds are
Truly wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say I'm the best, and I've seen a few people ask if I was taking notes from the likes of Dimension 20 or Critical Role, but I'll let you all in on a little secret. I've only seen a handful of episodes of Critical Role. I have never seen anything of Dimension 20. And a lot of those styles of actual play I barely watch. The only one I ever watched to conclusion was Power Rangers Hyperforce, and I already spoke at length about my issues with that. Although if they used that system instead of the one we got, maybe I would have had a better attitude about Power Rangers in RPG form officially. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. So I will note for the future, because I will not be doing Fated Continuum later today. Just getting into what the schedule is for the rest of the day, but the Sunday gaming end of things, that's still on the table. And next week I will be going into the 1.0 era of Sword World in significantly more detail.
Nice.
Because the plan still is to cover as much of the 1.0 era of Sword World before the end of the calendar year. So that once we start with 2026, I can go straight into the 2.0 and then 2.5 eras.
Looking forward to it.
I have thought about doing a book club thing going over some of the novels, but I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to structure that. And I will note only while talking about refraining from referencing Critical Role or put up a specific rule. I accidentally caused a Wayne's World style sign of no Matt Mercer to show up at my LGS. if only because people kept bringing him up while I was GMing for people on Free RPG Day, and I got sick of it. I end up half-jokingly said it to the guy who ran the store. He ends up putting a sign there the next week. I didn't think he'd do it. I was just saying it because I was frustrated. Pro tip for those who aren't in the know: bringing up how someone else runs their game while you're in a game with a different GM is very bad form. No one wants a backseat driver. But that being said,
rubbernecking for shame.
But better that than rubber band AI. I think that will do it for this little impromptu Q&A. This is a little unorthodox from what I usually do, but it was still a enjoyable experience, and I hope to see some of you again for some of the future stuff that I've got for the rest of today and the rest of this week. As for those of you who are new, things are always happening in the monastery. So as Yoshi P would say, please look forward to it. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having Monk, and it was great to see you all, you lovely people in the Twitch and YouTube chat.
Bye.
Thank you. something more.